Good morning all, welcome and thank you for those who are listening live, and hi as well if you're listening on the recording. So, this is a webinar about virtual reality, titled this, A Virtual Escape into Mapping, and you'll see why in due course. So first things first, I suppose we have for you an agenda. And so what I'll be talking about, well, the virtual reality VR projects that we've been undertaking, mention approaches to incorporating spatial data within those projects. There'll be some lessons learned just about VR development in general, some observations about what we've seen people doing when they're using it and how that works, and maybe a little bit about whether VR is a good choice for you guys. I don't know who's listening right now, so maybe you're already experienced with this, but maybe you're not, and it's something you're thinking about. On the other hand, what I'll avoid in this one, I'm not going to mention really anything about augmented reality or mixed reality. We've been doing work with that as well, but I consider that to be a different sort of subject, so I'll avoid that one today. I'll also avoid what I suppose is general industry VR subjects, kit comparisons or which game engines more suitable, or speculation about VR and all the new kit that's possibly coming. It's an interesting, exciting time for this. The recent GDC conference, there was lots of announcements as well. It's all interesting stuff, but I'm probably not in the best position to be going over that. It's probably better to talk about what I know. So that picture is me. I really am that old. I've been at Ordnance Survey since 1986, so a fair old time now. And my career path at that time has been somewhat varied. I actually started in the admin side doing procurement and library and all sorts of things before switching paths and becoming a developer. And so I spent some years playing with databases. Another switch happened again. I joined the research department, and during that time I got involved with projects based around 3D city modeling, and that was the point where I also taught myself sort of standard 3D modeling and did a bit with real-time development using game engines and so on at that point too. After that, changed again, went to a product development area, and then spent a number of years not doing any 3D at all. And then last year things changed again, teams merged. I found myself in what is now called OS Labs. And from the start then, that included Layla Gordon, who did the previous webinar, who was already working with AR at that time, and another colleague called Russell Davis, who was on secondment in the team for a short period, who was looking into VR. He left, and I inherited the kit. So that's really, I think there's a thing there. Yeah, that's it. That's where the journey starts for me. Now, at that point, I think I had only used VR for about 2 minutes on one occasion and wasn't very impressed with it. If I'm being honest, so I was a bit confused about what to do with this thing. Also, I mean, I'm old enough to remember the 80s and the VR that happened then, which wasn't entirely successful, if those of you who remember that. More recently, I've seen a lot of negativity towards VR, or had seen it, so that was in the back of my mind. I was worried about my eyesight. I have a poor left eye. I've got very little stereo vision, so I wasn't sure that that would work for me. It turns out it does work for me. I was quite surprised. I can actually see almost better in VR than I can in real life. I don't know how that works, but it's true. And probably more than anything, I wasn't really sure why OS was thinking about VR at all. I kind of got the story with AR, but I wasn't so sure about this. However, a couple of things started to change my mind a bit. Firstly, I had a go at something called Oculus First Contact. It's one of the bundled applications I think you get with an Oculus Rift. And yeah, I tried that. The graphics were impressive, that was good, but what really kind of blew me away was the use of the hand controllers that go with it. I knew that controllers existed, but I just hadn't really figured out their significance. So that made a big impression on me. And Google Earth VR, that's kind of what you expect. It's the Google data in a VR environment, but the actual effect of seeing that is much more significant than I would have thought. So that impressed me as well. Later, we tried something called the Coco VR. It's like a movie trailer advert, really. That was another thing that impressed me, but I'll leave that for now. So that was where I got started. Now, before I go any further, what I will mention, I mentioned spatial data earlier. That's a broad term, and actually what I mean is actually a very broad range of things. So it could be map images, it could be feature data, it could be terrains, it could be 3D models, it could be point clouds. All of those different sorts of things, they are fair game, I think, for including in VR, as is just data that is not spatial in itself, but is somehow connected to it via IDs. So that's what I generally mean. And so you'll see some of that in the projects that follow. Also, what I thought I'd mention is just if you're going to create applications for VR, how do you do that? What's the environment? You need the hardware itself, of course. You need a engine for creating 3D content. Those are usually called game engines. So yeah, we need one of those. We need the tools that connect the game engine to the VR specific stuff. We need some ability to create what we might call art assets. And of course, ability to create the spatial content too. So specifically, we have an Oculus Rift, the consumer version with the controllers, and that requires a PC to go with it, a fairly beefy one. The game engine we use is Unity. That seems to be probably the sort of perhaps the better choice if you want the range of SDKs that are available out there for the sort of work we do here. You need some tools to help with the VR. So those are the specific ones from Oculus itself and something we use called VRTK as well, which is independent toolkit. It's very useful. For the art assets, I use Blender for the 3D models, GIMP for 2D art, and Audacity for any just sound recordings. It's a bit more tricky to go into the spatial data side. I think the key thing for me has been FME from Safe Software. That can export into formats that directly are usable in the VR space, but we've used QGIS and MeshLab and other things, and obviously plenty of things behind the scenes that would have created the data in the first place. Later in the presentation, I'll mention streaming as well, and we've used Mapbox for that. So when I joined, obviously VR was already underway. Actually, the first OS VR app that I'm aware of happened a few years back and was a model of Ben Nevis. I didn't have much to do with that. I believe it was published on Google Cardboard. Maybe there was, well, I'm pretty sure there was an Oculus dev kit version as well, but I don't know much about that, so we'll get rid of that now. Gone, right. So when I joined, Russell was in the team and he was already working on some projects, and a couple of those you can see here. One of them was called Bournemouth VR. The other one was a 3D model of our HQ. The Bournemouth one was data captured from proper aircraft and covered an area of a large part of Bournemouth that had been prepared by others earlier. The OSHQ one was from a drone. So both of these applications, yeah, it was a textured 3D model that had been put into the VR environment that you could then examine and look at. This is okay. In a way, it works quite well because the data comes alive a bit in VR, so it definitely has value in doing that. However, the experience doesn't last long because once you've looked at the model, there's not really much else you can do with it in just doing that. And as the model is just one thing without any sort of intelligence behind it, or at least the ones we used were, there's not much scope for developing along those lines. Also, it doesn't really give you the experience you get with the hand controllers and with some of the other apps I'd used previously. So I kind of wanted to do something different from that, even though that approach was what was on people's minds at that time. As it turned out, where are we? Oh, there we go. The first project I did was a bit of an odd one. and wasn't really reflecting what I was thinking at the time. However, some years in previous to that, I'd made a full 3D model of our building, the insides and everything. So someone suggested putting that in VR. I didn't see the point of that in itself, but a colleague of mine, he had created a database of desk information. So that was what sort of desk, where they are, what orientation, and so on. So it became clear that using that information with my stripped out model with no desks in, I could then instantiate desks into it according to what the data said. Again, this doesn't seem too exciting in itself, just simulating what we've got. However, by changing the data, we can then show what the desk would be like after a planned move. So that was something we actually tried. We did that. We showed the manager of a team that was just about to go through a move what the desk would like. She could walk around in virtual space, sit at desks and so on, and then tell us what she thought. So that worked really well. That's obviously being my first VR project, that was a big learning curve to do that, but two specific messages came from it. One was the model itself needs to be pretty good. If there's any sort of glitches and anomalies and gaps in VR, you will see them. You've got to make sure everything is good. And the other one, which we'll then revisit a bit later, is how you got the text information into Unity and what you did with it. The first time I tried that, I did some CSV, processed that. It was okay, but a bit cumbersome to do that. It seemed a better option was to use JSON. So it turned out Unity had a JSON importer, and I spent a day trying to use it and failed completely. I couldn't work out what was wrong. It turns out that it's actually only of limited, it only covers limited scenarios, if you like. But there was a third-party one called JSON Object I found, and that one did work. So that's how we got there, and this is going to be significant later. So that was the OSHQ Desks project. However, it was okay, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So the questions in my mind at that point of what I was really thinking was, could our 2D maps, our regular products, our regular data products, and so on, be used in VR too? We've been concentrating on these 3D textured models, which were fine, but they're not a part of our regular output. And I thought, well, surely we should be looking at doing something with our normal products. So that was on my mind. I was thinking about, well, if we're going to make anything in VR, what actually is proven to already work? And that turned out to be sort of games and education and simulation things. And so I thought, if I make something, maybe it should be along those lines, just because that seems to work. I was wondering how the touch controllers would work if you're using them with map features and so on. So that seemed interesting to me. And would this actually sort of broaden the appeal of what maps and map data could be? Would it give a different audience? Would it keep people's interest more? So that was interesting. So I came up with an idea of the map room escape. So what I would do is I would create a virtual room. I would put in it a table onto which map data could be put and manipulated. And then around that, I would use the escape room sort of paradigm, sort of game mechanic, where you get challenged to complete certain tasks. If you do that, you are able to get a passcode that gives you a key, which then lets you out of the door. So it's like a very simple way of incentivizing people to interact with your application. So as you can see, I made that there. I won't talk about that too much more right now. I think it's probably easier to just show you a video of various things that are happening within it. That should give you a better idea of what it really is that we've got.
Welcome to the Map Room. Mission accomplished. You've done very well.
That is indeed the Map Room Escape. What you didn't really see much of there is the fact that one of the screens and also the audio gives instructions in relation to what you need to do and what you've just done. It's contextual. It uses the finite state machine and all of that sort of thing going on, but couldn't really show that so well in the video. One thing that you saw in the video, which came later, wasn't in the original plan, was the support for a product we have called OS Open Green Space, one of our more recent products. Earlier this year, I was asked if we could present at a conference and present the VR. So I said yes. And then it was asked that could we focus it on something green, because that was the conference theme, I suppose. And so I had a bit of a think about that and realized that aside from being this sort of game environment, what we could also use this for was actually a sort of effective product demonstrator. Now, OS Open Green Space has two types of data within it. One of them are polygons, which represent, well, green spaces, usually in urban areas. And so these were then represented on the map as polygon features, separate features from the map underneath, that makes it interactive. And these were indeed categorized by different colors as well. And alongside that, the data also includes access points where pedestrians or vehicles can get into those green spaces. So for this one, as you can see on the left of the image there, I experimented a bit with 3D models. I made a little style for pedestrian access and one of those car park entry barrier things for the vehicle access. Whether that was a good idea or not, I'm in two minds, because people just ask about them being goalposts, but never mind. It was a thought, and it's something you obviously can do in VR, which is not necessarily going to be found in other mediums. The other thing on this one, from the start, I rather liked the idea of having some images in the map room as well, so that this was a chance to actually put some in and add an extra screen in, and you probably saw the other screen moving out the way on that one. So suddenly I had an application that could work in different modes. It could be the game, it could be this demonstrator, and it could also work in a sort of a free play, free explore mode as well. So I've got a slide here which just talks about some of the features that are going on with it. So there's base maps, these are images, there's points and polygon features, separate things for that. It works with multiple scales, there's attribution on those points and polygons and so on. And the photo assets that I mentioned before. We've got the 3 game modes I just mentioned. We have some interaction, different things going on, the audio narration, the data cartridge idea, borrowed from several other VR applications. The fact that you can touch things and grab things and make things happen with that. And then you've got the screen displays giving you information as well. The scene itself, obviously that room, I made that from scratch, and there's things in there that make it dynamic, things you can pick up, things you can move, and so on. And then other just background audio, background music or noises when you drop things, all those things go on as well. And then the experience it actually gives you, I think experience is an important word with VR, and hopefully it's fun, immersive, and you've got that incentive there for people to keep at it. That's the idea anyway. Now, what I've avoided talking out with this one is how we got the spatial features in there. Now, the base maps you saw on the table, that's just an image. Getting images into Unity, that's just bread and butter for it. Moving them about is a case of just manipulating the texture coordinates. So that's fairly okay. But getting regular map data, regular features in is a different matter. I mentioned before about using JSON to import the text data I had for the OSHQ desks one. I needed something more here though. How do you get the actual geometry in? There's a couple of options, but the one I chose to do for this was to create a GeoJSON importer for Unity as well. So I took the JSON object asset that I'd already found previously and then built on top of that something that would understand points, lines, polygons, and also the multi points and multi-lines, and so on, and the attribution that comes with it, and read that in and then instantiate that information as geometry and attributes and everything that Unity needs for it. So that's how we got the polygons and points in. There's some other stuff to it as well to do with shaders and edges and things, but yeah, it's not the most straightforward thing, but it worked, at least for this project. There is a plan, I think, at the moment to actually release specifically the GeoJSON importer, perhaps by GitHub. If you're interested in that, let me know, and I'll let you know when that has happened. It must be said, there are some limitations in this approach. At the moment, the polygons, yeah, if you've got a polygon with a hole in it, it just takes the outer ring. Maybe that's something I'll address later, but it wasn't something I needed for the first iteration, and it's kind of complicated to do the holes. At the moment, also, it only uses British National Grid coordinates. The other thing with it, though, I'm not convinced that it's going to scale up if you have got loads and loads of features. And if you need that, then there's something else you can do instead, which is going to bring me on to the project that I'm currently working on. As a sideline, just before I get there, something we've been using for this is Mapbox. That's something we've used in other projects around OS for a little while. We're not anything to do with them, we're just a customer, but what Mapbox do offer is an SDK for Unity, so that enables the data we've used for other things to be pulled into Unity itself. Mapbox is a mapping platform. You can put your own data in there, you can style it, and then it can be streamed out as you need it. So in the case of a VR app, rather than putting all our data into the app itself, what we can do is set that up to link onto this Mapbox SDK, and then when the app is running, we can request what we need just at that time, which would solve the problem of having too many features. So the project I've got underway now is code-named, if you like, GeoStadium. The picture there is what it is at the moment. It might well change quite dramatically from that. But the idea is with this one, well, at the time I started, I wanted to use Mapbox just because we wanted to try it. And I didn't want to repeat the map room thing with the table and that scale, so I thought maybe we could make a replica floor map. In VR space, it's equivalent to 10 meters by 10 meters. We've made real floor maps here before, so I thought it would be something along those lines. And once I've made that, I realized that I was on the way to creating an exhibition space, and then we found out that there was a project that could use such a thing, and so that's the background behind this one, and we're just working with that project now to finalize exactly how that's going to work. Another thing, I mentioned the hand controllers earlier, and they're awesome. The only problem with all that is that you're then very limited to the kit that you can use the application on. In this one, we think we're going to have a wider audience who might not have that kit. So I'm also looking at how we can make a VR app that also doubles as a desktop app, maybe even a mobile app. But we'll see how we go with that one. And so that's what I'm working on at the moment. Right. Over the time since doing this, one of the things we've done quite a lot is have to present what we've got to other people. And that's something of an adventure, it must be said. Now, we've done this to various groups, different ages, different backgrounds, and so on. School groups, at a rambling club, more senior, corporate people, academic people. We have regular VIP visitors here to HQ, and they get to see it. And of course, sharing with colleagues as well. So that's quite a range of people, and it works. But there's lots of challenges involved in doing this, as you see on that list there. Just setting them up to go to start with, setting the headset up, dealing with it if they've got glasses on, trying to work out whether they're seeing things clearly or whether it's misaligned and it's blurred. That's a problem. They can sometimes be confused with the touch controllers, particularly if they've not got a gaming background and they're not used to that. with the Oculus, you've got sensors on the table and you need to stay in front of those, and some people don't, and then it loses the pickup range, I suppose. And there's a cable as well, and people tend to get tangled up in that if you let them. Sometimes you get a group of people, and then you've got to deal with that because only one person has the headset on, and what do you do with the other people? Some people come in and they've done VR before and they get it, and the whole experience sort of happens very quickly because they're confident, and others will take a long time, seemingly getting very little way at all just because it's new to them. And there's times when you think, are they interested in the work I've done, or are they interested in just the fact that it's VR and they've not done it before? And it's hard to tell that. And then you've got the well-known VR nausea problems and things like that there to be dealt with. So yeah, if people are unfamiliar with the platform, it can be overwhelming when you first get them to try it, and especially if there's only a few minutes to do so, you're up against it really in that situation. However, having said all that, maybe put you off the idea, when it comes down to it, quite often people really like it, and they don't want to take the headset off, and they really enjoy it. And so yeah, it pays off in the end, even though there are those challenges. Now, being new to all this and being new to the development side, we want to create experiences. That's the first thing you learn, is that what's all this for, and experiences are it. That's what really pays off here. But there's some other things. We want to make it comfortable for a person. You don't want to put them in a scary place or a boring room. You don't want them to be feeling ill. Understanding the limit. Yeah, understand what the hardware can really do and what it can't do. There are certainly limits. And being efficient with your models, that's another thing to consider, which we certainly found to start with when we started out. Quality, I mentioned that one before. If the model has got glitches on, people will see it in a headset. Audio is important. If you want to grab someone's attention, you can't assume that they're looking in the way that you think they're looking. Using audio gets around that very well. It also, gives you that immersiveness, if you like. Hinges, that's a weird one. I tried making a door and I tried making a big lever for the zooming, and both of those things work to an extent, but never quite felt right. And it turns out that there are some things that work better in VR than others, and using buttons or using automated doors is a much better idea. So that was one thing. There may be some way of getting around that, but that's what I found. Don't underestimate how long it takes to create something. It's very easy to do. Also, once you show someone what you've done, they will inevitably suggest things that you could have done instead, or want extra things. So yeah, that can be challenging. You need core skills for this. You need to be able to create your 3D models and create your art assets and do all of that stuff. There's lots of different skills here to actually create the finished product. So don't underestimate that. And also, although the actual barriers to entry are relatively low, you can get going quite easily. The amount of things that are there to learn are incredible. So don't underestimate that. Final slide. I was just going to mention, is this something that you, my listeners, are doing? Is it something you should be doing? There's a lot of a buzz around it, and there seems to be a lot of projects that we hear that want to do this. I'm not always sure whether that's the right thing for that project or not. There are definite wins to get from it, but there are practical problems along the way. So, does the audience you have actually have access to the kit and the environment to do it? Do they have the experience to use it? Is buying kit at the right time? What's available now is going to be very different from what's out in a year's time. When is the right time to go for it? The actual, the Oculus is relatively inexpensive now. It needs a good PC to run it, but it's not a big investment. However, the investment in the time and skills to produce something would be considerable. And again, much of the software I've been using is open source or freely available. That's not usually a barrier. And the last thing I was going to mention is with the Mapbox SDK, or the new Google one that was announced, I think, last week, that's making things a bit more accessible, I believe, in this space. So perhaps that's going to affect your decision about what's going to be practical for you. Anyway, that's the end of it. My big message is experiences. If you want to create an experience for your users, then this is something to look into. Experiences sounds a bit broad, but actually I can't think of a better word to describe what you're getting from it. So thank you for listening.